Mail.
Good morning. My name is Mustafa Carroll. I'm the Executive Director for the Council on American Islamic Relations in Houston. We have been made aware of several errors in regards to Islam and Muslims in several of the texts. First of all, social studies, school service, active classroom, world history. The text states, quote, much of the violence you hear or read or hear about in the Middle East is related to jihad. This is wrong. The broad charge effectively blames Islam for a very complex cycle of violence while ignoring a host of other factors. Additionally, the majority of Muslims understand jihad as struggle for good to fight corruption, poverty, and oppression, and this text glosses over that. Worldview software, world history B, mid-1800s to present, the text states, the spread of international terrorism is an outgrowth of Islamic fundamentalism, which opposes Western political and cultural influences and Western ideology. What's wrong with this is that the statement about international terrorism is inaccurate and misleading. Not all international terrorism is an outgrowth of Islamic fundamentalism. Terrorist groups with national and political agendas have formed on every part of the world. For example, the Irish Republican Army grew from the quest by Irish Catholics to form an independent republic rather than being part of Great Britain. Jewish Zionist terrorists, notably by the Zionist Haganah, Irgun, and Stern gang groups, committed acts of terror in their quest to establish the Jewish state, among many others. Religiously motivated terrorism is just a tool that these folks will use to galvanize the masses. One other very important issue, an image of Muslim women wearing chadors, a large piece of cloth that is wrapped around the head and the upper body, leaving only the face exposed, is also incorrect. This is McGraw-Hill School Education World Geography. The first question asked whether, can I finish that statement?
Yes, please.
Okay. The first asks whether the chador affects women's interaction in public. The suggested answer is the chador limits women's interaction in public and makes them indistinguishable from one another and inhibits any kind of contact. And the second question asks, what does the chador reveal? That even in countries that claim there is equality for women, religious law still hinders women's rights. As part of their groundbreaking 6-year project, Gallup conducted tens of thousands of interviews with residents in more than 35 predominantly Muslim nations and found that Muslim women didn't see it as a hindrance.
Okay, Mr. Carroll, if you'll
Yes.
wrap up, and then you might have a question.
Okay.
So maybe one last sentence?
Yeah,
and then,
they didn't see it as a hindrance to their rights.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Okay. All right, thank you very much. We all have a copy of your testimony. Oh, Mrs. Knight. There you go.
I'm trying to determine where in this document you provided us with the correct response.
Oh, the correct response is right after, it's in my commentary. After that, I'll put what is the problem, and then I'll put what it says after that. So that's after each one of those. There's 4 books that we're referencing, and I've provided comments for all of those.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm asking you is, have you given us what the answer should be as opposed to what the publisher gave us?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay, other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, school board. Thank you for your service. My name is Dr. Amy Jo Baker. I'm a retired social studies director from the San Antonio School District, and I served 40 years on behalf of our students in the state. I'd like to come before you today to ask that you correct, or ask the publishers to correct some of the omissions of fact, bias, half-truths, and errors in the textbooks, because I think our students deserve textbooks that are historically accurate and not politically correct. An example is a Pearson 6th grade textbook that says a small number of Muslims in the region see European and American influence as a threat. They have adopted a form of Islamism that draws on the tradition of jihad. And the word jihad in Arabic simply means struggle. And for many Muslims, it can refer to the struggle to be a better person. And then they go on to say that some extremist groups say it's violent jihad. Ladies and gentlemen, for the Islamists, jihad does not mean the struggle to be a better person. In the Quran, the term jihad has usually meant the meaning to wage war. The great collections of the Hadith all contain a section devoted to jihad in which the military meaning predominates. The same is true of the classical manual of Sharia law. The overwhelming majority of classical theologians, jurists, and traditionalists understand the obligation of jihad in a military sense. And it's one of the commandments of the Muslim faith. This obligation is without limit of time or space. It must continue until the whole world has either accepted the Islamic faith or submitted to the power of the Islamic State. Another example that I was concerned about was the McGraw-Hill U.S. History to 1877. And I quote, "Young people in Cuba received many benefits from the communist government, including free education and health care." And then it goes on to say some other points about that they do live in a police state. My response to that is that Cuba's economic freedom score is 28.5, making it one of the world's least free in terms of economic freedom and one of the world's most repressed regimes. So no courts, they have no courts of independent or fair judiciary. There's corruption at the economic activity, and this is from a study of the American Heritage Foundation with the Wall Street Journal. So in summary, we ask that these corrections be made so that our students have the opportunity to have textbooks that reflect not America as the bad guy, but as America, an exceptional nation.
Thank you for being specific on your document here. Mrs. Miller.
I want to thank you for your 40 years of service. I think it's above and beyond, and I appreciate it. And thank you for coming to us and giving us this point of view or these factual corrections, okay? And we will absolutely make sure that this happens, okay, that they correct these errors.
Okay, Mrs. Knight, and then Ms. Hardy, and then Mr. Mercer.
My question is your testimony about jihad contradictory to what Mr. Carroll said about jihad?
Yes, ma'am. I have a quote here. According to Katie Gorka, the president of the Council on Global Security, and this was taken from a report from the New York Times about did they just provide proof of the Muslim Brotherhood influence, that the burning question for today is whether U.S. law enforcement or the military can be prepared properly for the rising threat from the Islamic State, ISIS, if there are constraints on what they are being taught about Islamic terrorism and what words they are allowed to use to describe the threat. And also, I bring to your attention P.D. James at the end of my presentation. I have a quote from her. She lived through the bombing of Great Britain when they were bombed by the Nazis. I believe that political correctness can be a form of linguistic fascism. Then it sends shivers down the spine of my generation who went to war against fascism.
Ms. Knight, you have another question?
I have a follow-up question, and I know the publishers and their experts will look at the different perspectives around all issues. But my question is, do you see a problem with the teachers given two different points about how this word jihad is interpreted?
I think it's important and for critical thinking to look at point of view and frame of reference. It's part of our TEKS under critical thinking. And so when you look at the frame of reference in terms of what the council care says, and then when you look at evidence, I think you may come up with two different conclusions.
Okay, so based on your comment, am I correct in understanding that you think the students' critical thinking skills would be enhanced around this or any other issues if they have a contrasting point of view about the same teach?
I think that the teachers can present the other point of view, but I think that it's very important for a sixth grade student to understand that communism and Nazism and Islamic terrorism is diametrically opposed to our constitutional republic and free enterprise, which has made this the great country that it is. And I know that exceptionalism is a loaded term and many people think of it in different perspectives, but I've had personal experience with that. In terms of, I had the privilege and opportunity to establish sister cities with Eglstein, France, with a delegation from Castroville in 1975, and we had people standing in the rain in France thanking us for liberating them during World War II. And I wasn't even born yet, but that sent shivers down me because these people understand what it means to lose freedom and what we're about as a nation.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I am Jonathan Kaplan, an assistant professor in the Middle Eastern Studies Department at UT Austin. I completed my doctorate in biblical studies at Harvard, and before joining the faculty at UT, served as a postdoctoral associate at Yale. While there are a number of errors across the proposed titles regarding the presentation of the biblical figure Moses, I want to highlight problems in the McGraw-Hill United States Government textbook that I believe are emblematic of factual errors present in many of the proposed titles. The text states, Moses, quote, calls for the law to apply equally to all people, end quote. The notion of legal equality is not known, however, to be from the Israelite legal tradition. The Israelite legal tradition is primarily concerned with Israel and not all people. While there are some rare instances in which non-Israelites are included in the Israelite legal system, such as in Leviticus 24:22, it is a gross exaggeration to view the Bible as the source of the foundational American ideal of legal equality. Further, the textbook describes, quote, the biblical idea of a covenant as, quote, an ancient Jewish term meaning a special kind of agreement between people and God. This assertion contains at least two problems. First, the ideal of covenant is not uniquely Israelite, but instead finds its roots in the broader ancient Near Eastern legal tradition. This point reflects a wider problem in the proposed titles of presenting the Bible as the source of legal ideas. As scholars have noted since the dawn of the last century, the Bible mediates and adapts rather than originates its legislation. Covenants take on many forms in the Bible and not simply between God and a people group, as the proposed title states. They also express relationships between people of both equal and unequal status. These human forms of covenant are more analogical to the genesis of American government, but it is an overstatement to say these latter notions of covenant, quote, influenced the formation of colonial government and contributed to our constitutional structure. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, Ms. Hardy.
I will say I do not have a degree in any kind of Middle Eastern studies, but I will disagree with you from the fact that when we put Moses in the text to begin with, I was here and I heard the scholar who encouraged us to do this, and it's a very simple process. Mosaic law influenced English common law. English common law influenced American law. And if you are a student of American history and have read the life stories like McCullough's book on John Adams or any of the other really scholarly works on these people, they were so familiar with biblical background, they could quote it better than most pastors or rabbis could. They were that astute with biblical knowledge. And that was
a very strong influence. This ludicrousy that says that the media has interpreted us as saying Moses was a founding father really annoys me. But the fact that Moses had the lawgiver, given that title throughout history, the lawgiver influenced the law as opposed to, say, Hammurabi's code, where you could pay to get out of taking responsibility. This had more of an equality to it.
Do you have a question, Ms. Hardy?
So I'm going to say that I think that the purpose of Moses in there is very straightforward with English common law to American law.
I would respectfully disagree. Not that Moses is not important to the American legal tradition, right? I understand.
Well, that's why he's in there.
Of course, it's not that fact. The fact is the presentation of the fact, and the obliteration of all details associated with his presentation, right? I think it's just as important for our students to learn that Moses comes out of a broader legal tradition. Oftentimes, Israelite legal tradition in the proposed titles is reduced to the, quote, 10 Commandments. Well, I want to ask the question, which 10 Commandments? The one in Exodus 20 or the one in Deuteronomy 4? Or perhaps the one embedded in the Holiness Code in the book of Leviticus? What 10 Commandments are we talking about? How are they presented? How do they reflect a broader legal tradition that's representative of the ancient Near East, which is in some ways not only something that the Bible mediates, right, but something that is part of a broader conversation that's part of the Western tradition.
And the broader conversation, a part of Western tradition, is what I'm saying, but we're talking about high school seniors looking at a government class that is looking for origins of our legal system. So that's the reason that, and I'm not sure which, I think you're referring to McGraw-Hill,
Yes,
and I'll
ma'am.
go back and look at what they've said, but the fact is, most people have been disturbed by the fact that we give any credit or credence to Moses at all, and that's why I'm saying what I've said, and I do believe it has its place in there. I don't think that they need to go into extreme detail, and I'll have to go look at that particular text to see, but we're really talking about surveys, and that's one of my problems with a lot of the people that have questioned things that are in there. They come back with a much longer, the idea, if we went into the covenant relationship with Mosaic law, then they would be the same people here complaining because you're trying to bring religion into the whole.
Okay. Zachary, welcome back, and I believe this is our last
All right.
last testifier, and then we will take a break.
Yeah. All right, board members. My name is Zack Kopplin, and I'm a board member of the Houston chapter of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Thank y'all so much for allowing me to be here and testify about the social studies textbooks you're going to vote on today. I spoke to this board in September and explained that we're concerned about many of the textbooks you're considering, which contain misleading information about the U.S. Constitution and the separation of church and state, as well as negative portrayals of the Islamic faith and Muslims. We were pleased to learn that publishers did listen and address some of our concerns. Unfortunately, passages exaggerating the influence of Christianity on this nation's founding still remain in several of the textbooks. Working in conjunction with the Texas Freedom Network, People for the American Way, we have collected 40,000 signatures from members across the country who support giving Texas students an accurate social studies education, one that does not exaggerate the influence of Moses, the Ten Commandments, and Judeo-Christian tradition on America's early democracy and legal structure, but rather correctly teaches students about the founding of our government. This morning, we delivered these signatures directly to the publishers, and we hope that you, too, will support our efforts to remove content that overstates the alleged biblical sources for our history, law, and government. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify, and I imagine Mr. Mercer probably has some questions for me.
Do you, Mr. Mercer?
Thank you, Zach, for being here. Are you compensated in any way for being here?
I'm not compensated. I'm just representing AU as in my capacity as a board member of Houston's chapter.
And I appreciate the signatures too, but the 15 of us here are elected officials, and we have to stand by what we vote for. You realize that, right?
Yes.
I mean, all the signatures are very important. We love people involved, but from section 1 to 15, where we are elected officials, and we have to stand by our vote. You understand that?
I understand that.
Good, and thank you for being here. Is there any specific about Moses or Ten Commandments, or are there certain commandments that you don't like? Or tell me that.
So, you've been asking, because I think this is sort of the point you're getting at again, is Moses a founding father? And the point is he's not a founding father.
And has this board ever said that?
No, but the textbooks are addressing it in a way that makes it appear like he might be a founding father. And so, again, we've read this teak, which points out Moses.
I totally I've never seen anything in the teak, anything else. It lists certain people. I never see the word founding father with Moses, and I'm very adamant about this. It upsets me that anyone would go out to the media and say that this board said a great man who lived 4,000 years before our founding of a country somehow was a founding father. This board has never said that, and it's not in our teak, so I want to make that clear.
So, if you will, I can read the teak, which is, identify the individuals whose principles of laws and government institutions informed the American founding documents, which is why, and that's including Moses. And so that's why you see the whole founding part of it.
And the list, continue reading the rest of the passage.
I don't have the rest list, but the point was on Moses.
It lists Moses, John Locke, it lists
William Blackstone and Charles de Montesquieu and John Locke.
And so the point is, you see people have said it implies he's a founding father because it's been treated that way with the founding documents.
No, but it's not. It's something that's something. I mean.
Anyway, I think the important point is.
Okay, Zach, let's see if Mr. Mercer has a question.
No one could. I mean, I understand your point. I thoroughly disagree with you. No one could take that. And I think it's shameful that anyone would go to the national media and tell them that this board is saying that Moses was founding father. I understand your point, but I respectfully, strongly disagree.
I mean, I would agree with you. Moses is not a founding father, and the textbook should not treat it as
But
such.
his influence is without question in my mind.
All right. Anyway.
Thank you, sir.
All right, any other questions? Dr. Dominguez.
I just have one comment, Zachary. Thank you very much for your remarks.
Thank you so much, too. Thank you all for your service.
Mrs. Knight. You've said it now. Right. All right, Mrs. Knight, why don't you wrap us up with a question here?
Yes. When you read that, Zach, is it a matter of the wording and the interpretation of the wording
So,
that leads to the conclusion, in some people's mind, that you're saying that he was a founding father?
so I think there's two actually distinct issues. One, which is Mr. Mercer's complaining about the media coverage, which has sort of taken sort of sold it as he's a founding father, because that's how it's sort of portrayed in the textbooks. And the bigger issue is that he's portrayed with undue influence on the American founding, on the American founding documents, and on American law, which isn't actual reality.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you all so much.
Any other thoughts?